Welcome to The Word, people, where we bring you straight up sales 411. You get to chill and hang with the best and the brightest in the sales industry. And we don't do it boring, we do it with swagger. So let's go, people. It is on. Hey, everybody. What's up? Welcome to The Word, episode 33. This one is going to be a dope word because we're going to tackle something that's flying around the web, hustle and grit and grind and all that shit. And we're going to tackle it with the person who literally wrote the book, right? So, folks, The Word is all about bringing you fat, dope, real-life sales experience, knowledge in a fun, exciting way, not in a boring 1970s Make America Great kind of way again. So, with that, Kiki, I'm here with my girl, Kiki. Kiki, what's going on, sister?
Hello. I'm super excited to have Angela here. We had quite a gritty story to tell ourselves getting you on board here. And I'm really excited to dig into grit, the power of passion and perseverance. I think salespeople especially need that.
Great.
Truth. So that is it, folks. This is who we have today. We have Angela Duckworth. Angela is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the author of a new book called Grit. Her work has been targeted at trying to understand what makes people successful. And you will be happy to know that it's not as much about accident at birth as you like to think it is, not who you were born to, the schools you went to, the IQ you have, but how much work you're willing to put in. So without further ado, welcome Angela D. What's going on, sister?
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, it's gonna be fun. So let's kick off. Why are you here today, Angela? Why are you here on The Word?
I'm here because you are really gritty and you wouldn't leave me alone. No, I'm here because I want to talk about my work. I'm really interested in the questions you're going to ask me. I'm interested in your perspective, really. But it is also true that you are relentlessly persistent. And so I was on book tour, and all my time was booked. It was sort of accounted for. But you made this happen, and I am honored by your your determination.
Well, it was earned. It was absolutely earned. I saw you speak in New York when the book first came out. I read the book. I'd actually known about you and your work before your book came out. I think we had actually reached out to you to be on the show like last year, and you're like, oh, I'm writing a book, so hit me up later.
Right.
So it was earned, sister. It's absolutely earned because I'm fascinated by this.
That's kind of success.
So, yeah, right? Amen. So with that, look, you have a great story that I'd like you to start this whole thing off with about your own grit. And something, when I was sitting in New York, you said, oh, I have this goal to meet somebody because they're one of the most greedy people in the world. And now I just saw 13 hours ago, you tweeted, you finally made that happen. Tell everybody about it.
I climbed to the top of the mountain, right? So I have been studying Will Smith, the musician, the actor, the Hollywood giant for years. I'm thinking at least 10. I think I've been on his trail for about a decade, and I have tried every means of getting in touch with him, but as you might guess, people like Will Smith have a lot of walls before you get to them. So I thought to myself while I was writing the book, and I was quoting him, right? But I was quoting him from his own interviews with other people over the years that had been videotaped. I thought, I'm gonna meet this guy. I'm gonna be that passionate and persevering person. So I won't give you all the details, but because you know what, the details are always boring. But as we all know who've ever achieved anything, there are a lot of those details. Anyway, eventually, last night, he's promoting his new film. He had a dinner very generously. This guy is so nice. The last thing I said to him that evening was like, you are nice. But he very kindly invited me. He had a bunch of his friends. I sat next to Larry Gilmore, who was unbelievable. And so, we talked about our theories of achievement for the evening, which is just like my dream dinner. Like, I get to talk to people who are so thoughtful. And by that, I mean Will and also Larry, about, what is life about, and how do you optimize your own performance? What are the psychological barriers. Like, how do you even think about your own mind? And so, yeah, and then I took the train home back to Philly. You know, Will's from Philadelphia, but
yeah, right, yeah,
right, like, and it was great. It was great. It was a little surreal, and I will say that as impressed as I was about, you know, the quality of his thinking about, you know, about human nature, I really was also struck, as I am with many of the people that I most admire. Like, he is nice. He treated everybody like royalty, like every single person, and so, you know, that's character.
That is, I love that story, and I'm getting all, like, you know, goosebumps and all that, because I do believe in my heart of hearts that the staying power of super athletes, even though they can't perform anymore, for the most part, there's always outliers, and super famous people, is their niceness. Like, they, for some reason, they recognize that all that blood, sweat, and tears and everything they did, I don't want to call them humble, because I think that's oversimplification, but there is a commitment to other people and a niceness that they don't shed, that allows them to maintain. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, you know, certainly, like, the people that leap to mind, and like you said, you know, I'm sure people will tell you about exceptions, but, you know, there is something, I think it's not a coincidence that some of the people who are the most passionate and persevering, the most accomplished, are really also the most authentic and like, genuinely other oriented. One of the things that Will said that I was the whole way home just, like, reflecting on this conversation. Obviously, you don't spend 10 years trying to do something and then forget about it. But, you know, I asked him, like, what are you trying to do now, right? So he said, creation and relation, right? Creating and relating. When you make a movie, it's like you're creating something, and you are relating in the best possible way with other people. And so that overlap. And I will say that piece about relating, I mean, one of the things that, you know, I think is true about gritty people is they are most often driven by some purpose that is about relating to other people. It's almost never a completely solipsistic, selfish pursuit.
Mm-hmm. No, and I don't want to go to a rat hole, but I like what you said about creation and relation. I blogged about this a little while ago, and I say it to my daughters, and I haven't said it in a while because I don't drop them off at school. Summertime, I got to get back into it. But every morning when I set my daughters to school, I would say, listen, girls, I want you to create something, learn something, and share something. Just do those three things today, and everything else to be create something, learn something, share something. So it was sort of validating to hear him say creation, relation. I mean, I think that's what it's about at the end of the day. You really can't do much if you can't create. You're not sharing or connecting, and you're not learning and growing. So that was awesome. All right. So I love your story. Congratulations. Way cool, everybody. I am talking to Angela Duckworth. She is the author of Grit and a University of Penn professor, and has done tremendous amounts of work around success and primarily what it takes in the idea of grit. So Angela, let's take a minute to probably the equivalent of you, of a famous person singing a song for the umpteenth thousandth time because everybody loves it. What is grit? What made you write the book? And tell us a little bit about the backstory of how you got here.
So I'll start with what I define grit to be. I define grit as a combination of passion and perseverance, both in combination for the long term, striving for some goal that is meaningful to you, that you can say, you know, I love this. This is what I deeply, truly, authentically want to do. And then working really hard at it. So it's not giving up, but not giving up in your effort, but not giving up in your commitment. Those two things. Why did I study? Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah.
I was going to say, I was like, oh, wait, you had another part of that, which is like the backstory of this. So I came to the study of the psychology of high achievers through education, through kids. I mean, since I was a teenager, I don't know, for whatever reason, I felt like I wanted to. I felt like everybody feels. I feel like everybody has some desire to, like, help people. You know, like, you walk down the street and there's, like, so many people to help, right? People don't have homes, people don't have jobs, like. So I wanted to help kids, and I started off doing different things in education. I taught in classrooms, middle school and high school math. And
you're being humble, by the way. You're being humble. You quit a big, fat, high-paying, dope job.
I did. I quit a high-paying job to to teach, on the Lower East Side before the Lower East Side was cool. And, these kids were hard to teach. I won't lie about that. And, I think the thing about coming to psychology through education is that what I saw and what was most urgent for me was to get these kids to be as capable as I knew they could be academically, and so that when they got off, and school is not the end, it's the beginning, that they could do something, that they'd be able to earn a living and save some money for retirement and have their own family. And there was a big yawning gap. I mean, people call it the achievement gap. But when it's really right there in front of you, and this kid who is 14 years old, like, cannot add single-digit numbers, and like they can't, write a sentence, like the gap is very real. It was so, powerful for me to realize also by spending time with these kids that really, in terms of like what as their math teacher, wanted them to learn, I felt like it was within their intellectual reach. In other words, I wasn't going home at the end of the day thinking, well, this kid is never going to learn algebra because they just don't have the neurons, like they don't have the capacity. But I did see that there were capabilities, there were habits, there were mindsets that these kids lacked that were in the way of them reaching their potential. So I came to the study of the psychology of achievement through that path. I'm often asked, why don't you study gratitude, or why don't you study kindness, or, honesty? And I think to myself, I've got two kids at home. They're 14 and 13. I for sure want them to be kind and grateful and honest and a bunch of other things, but I don't study them. It's not that I don't think they're important, but you can only really study one or two things. And I do think that if I think about like why I chose to study what I study, I think it's because when I was with these kids struggling, it's that I saw the barriers, the psychological barriers that stood in the way of a successful life. Those were the things that I ended up gravitating to.
So if I can sort of take the answer to that question just a step further, you really can't teach gratitude and happiness until someone knows how to achieve something and to feel good about something, right? Like, how do you take someone who doesn't have have a grit, isn't accomplishing, and can't accomplish anything, or is unable to accomplish something? How do you teach them gratitude, right? How do you teach them to be happy? It seems inverted.
So this is a debate that I don't know that I have a strong position on. I don't know that that you have to sequence it entirely. Like, it's not like I think you should take care of their grit and their self-control, and then, only then, do you want to make them grateful? And my intuition is actually that a lot of these things go together. When we look at our data, the kids who teachers say, this is a grateful kid. This is a kid who like genuinely feels and expresses appreciation for what they have, and an understanding of the people for whom, this has been part of their life and they made it happen. Those grateful kids tend to be the kids who are good at regulating their emotion, their attention. Those are the same ones who are gritty. They persist despite frustration. They stay focused on their goals. Now, you could ask the question, why do character strengths like gratitude and open-minded thinking and grit, why do they go together? And one thing might be that, there's different possibilities. I think some of these sort of lead to each other. It's like, now I'm kind of reasonably self-controlled kid and I can handle my emotions, and that opens the door to feeling gratitude, because I got to handle it. The other thing I think that's going on, and life is complex, so sorry to be so nuanced here, but I think it is a relatively complicated picture. I think there are certain situations in which kids and adults thrive, and they have certain features. And I think those features actually give rise to lots of different character strengths. The two dimensions that I think are most important is the appropriate level of challenge. I mean, I don't think people grow in character, including grit or any things we talked about, unless they're challenged. To, like when you see that your daughter hasn't written a thank you note to somebody who gave them a present, and you need to like take the time and like challenge your daughter, be like, you know what? Like, let's mentally think about what this person did to earn the money and then go to the store, think about what you wanted, send it to you, write you a card. Like, let's think about like doing what you weren't going to do without me, challenging you to do it. But like, let's, write that note back. They need challenge, appropriate levels of challenge, not like, crazy beyond what they can handle challenge. And then they really need support. And I think that challenge and support, that parent who also says like, look, you're not a bad person for not writing there. Like, I totally love you. I love you unconditionally. That challenge and support might be the ingredients that give rise to grit, but also these other qualities that I don't study, but that are, hugely important.
I think you're right. It really is nuanced. And I think that was a good answer. And one of these days when I'm in New York or in Pennsylvania, I'll pester you some more. We'll sit down for dinner and we'll go through all this. I'm fascinated by this type of stuff. But we spent hours on here going on this. So, but I agree. I think there's a lot to it. And I will not let us get down this rat hole, but it can't help but let me think about what's happening in the election and the way people view their candidates and view where we are in this country. And the mere fact that someone said, let's make this country great again, suggests all kinds of things about, the filter that they're looking at great happiness and grace and appreciation, et cetera. So, but I won't let us divulge, I promise. Diverge. So, all right. So one of the things I thought was really fascinating, and then from a backstory, then we're going to move into the front story, if you will, is your observation with your students, right? You alluded to it a bit, but you had these kids that weren't necessarily the smartest kids. You had these kids who didn't have the highest IQs, weren't necessarily what you would call the ones that were supposed to succeed, and they were outperforming. And isn't that what the trigger? Talk a little about the trigger for this idea. Wait a minute, something's not right.
Yeah, so when you start teaching a class, it's very obvious. All of us have been in situations where we were teaching somebody something new, or we're part of whatever. We're part of a group of people learning something new for the first time. It's pretty obvious, pretty early on, that some people do learn faster in those domains. Like take a skiing lesson, 10 of you, 2 people with like 30 minutes, they're just like going down the slope, and somebody's really struggling. I had the same experience as a teacher. There are kids for whom math came very easily and very quickly, and then others who struggled. So this whole continuum. The observation, the impetus for a lot of my work came from the fact that ability did not always guarantee performing the best at the end of the year. And I'm not saying that being smart is a bad thing, or that there wasn't any correlation. Obviously the kids who are able on average did fairly well, but there were absolutely exceptions. Kids who are so bright, who just tanked. Who just like never did their homework, who never studied, who totally goofed off in class. And, they didn't, math isn't magic. You have to actually apply yourself. And so at the end of the year, they didn't have good grades, right? They hadn't mastered what I asked them to master. And I did have these kids who weren't obviously, more gifted, but they worked hard. They were open. A lot of people will call this like coachability. They were hungry, right? So coachability. It's like, I think that's a real thing. It's like these kids were open for feedback. When I would say like, no, not like that, like this, they weren't defensive. They were like, oh, what do you mean? Like, why not like this? It's like, so a lot of those kids did phenomenally well. I had a kid who was placed into my class. This kid named David, who I actually saw. I kept in touch with him, since he was in my freshman algebra class, and I can't remember how many years ago it is, but he's like all grown up. He has his PhD. He's actually literally a rocket.
Just 3 or 4, Angela. Just 3 or 4 years ago. You're only 29.
I'm 7 years old. But he, he started off in my class. I wasn't teaching the highest level class. I wasn't assigned to teach the highest level class as a sort of rookie teacher. And this kid was placed into my group, not the highest level group, based on one of the like placement tests, right? Like, what can this kid do? And he was very quiet, and he just like, you wouldn't think anything of this kid, but he was so dedicated. First, he just loved learning about math and just such a hard worker. He graduated, we got him into the higher level math class. He transferred out of my class in the middle of the year with like, just put him in the higher level. He struggled again. He got bad grades, but he worked his way back. And then he went to Swarthmore. He was an engineering major. He went to UCLA, got his PhD in rocket science. I mean, physics, whatever, I don't know, like whatever, aerophysics. And then, now he's really successful. The greatest thing about the story, by the way, is that when I saw him on book tour, and then since then, I really had some time to talk. And I said, like, are you happy? And he's like, I'm pretty happy. And I was like, well, when are you really happy? And he's like, I'm really happy when I'm teaching kids. So the 360 on this story is that I think he's going to go back and become a math teacher. And, hopefully that math teacher who just like sees kids and sees what they can do. Oftentimes the kids can't even see it themselves.
I love that story. I remember you talked about it in the book. I mean, that is just phenomenal. All right, so we got the backstory now. We know how you came to it. We're glad you did it. So let's kind of move this into adults now, right? And I see personally, I'm gritty sometimes, not gritty other times. But I was just talking to someone today. One of my clients, it drives me insane what appears to be the lack of the amount of apathy that most people take in their life. I actually did a little I should have sent it to you beforehand. I do these short spaz out things where I just go off on something that's bothering me. I go on these rants. And one of them was on the idea that people aren't very good at their jobs, that 20% excel, 10% are off, and the rest are just sort of in the middle. And I say, you chose your job and you choose not to be amazing at it. Why is it so few people have a commitment to this?
I think this is a great question. I'll answer it if you'll also answer it. I mean, I'm really interested in what you think, because you clearly, you clearly observe the same thing I do. I mean, it is a bit of a puzzle. It's in particular a puzzle when you think about how happy being really good at something makes you, right? I mean, there is I think a basic human need, and it's not just me, right? Like most psychologists who study motivation believe that there is a basic human motive for competence. You could also say it in a different way, like that there's a basic human motive for excellence. Like everybody knows the difference between like, a job done well and a job done really well. And it brings like without even thinking about it, it gratifies you. So it is in a way like irrational if you think about it. It's like, why won't people do that? I don't have a complete answer for it. I'm also, puzzled by it, but I would say that, you always have to, I actually think people are pretty rational in the sense that, they are doing things that feel good, and they tend not to do things that feel bad. I mean, they don't put their hands on hot stoves, and they'll eat the food that's more delicious, not less delicious. And the question is like, maybe there's some way in which high performing people are able to find the gratification of being excellent, which is always a little bit deferred in time, right? Maybe they're able to find some immediate gratification in the process. One of the people that I studied for the book, and he's a paragon of grit, Bob Mankoff, who, got rejected from the New Yorker 2,000 times in a row as a cartoonist before he got one in, and now is the longtime editor of the cartoons of the New Yorker. And he said that, at this point in his career, if he can just make himself laugh a little, like if he finds these gratifications in the process, I think, and maybe what we shouldn't be asking people to do is delay gratification forever. And like, if you work 70 hours a week, and you overcome all this, then like 10 years from now, you might have this feeling of confidence. I mean, like, this is my lab notebook, right? When I check off like one thing, I put a circle next to everything I haven't done. I check off one thing. I mean, I don't do a cartwheel, but like, it's not like Will Smith, but it's like, I get a little dopamine burst. I'm like, oh, great. So it's a really interesting puzzle, but I think that you always have to start with the assumption that people are in some way rational. So if that person is like, you go into the store and they're like on their phone and they're not even paying attention to you, but their whole job is to sell you stuff. And you're like, why aren't you being better at your job? I think you have to really ask why, but ask why in a way that assumes that what they're doing has some rational basis.
Yes, the whole rational argument I find interesting too. I mean, there's been a lot of economics around the quote unquote concept of rational, right? So even that in itself is a whole different discipline. I think I think. Look, I'm not the expert like you. I'm a hack. I'm probably one of those students that you would have loved and hated, but I am extremely aware and I process information. I don't let it get away from me. So this is a hack's point of view. I think there's a micro answer and a macro answer. The micro answer, I think, is more deep in the rationale, and I haven't got that one figured out. But the macro, I have a slightly better understanding. I believe it's this. Through small unintended consequences or decisions we make, I call it the wall. We start building this brick wall around ourselves, right? Because we're chasing the American dream. We wanted something now. We didn't save our money. We made a lot of bad choices that create this wall that pins us in. And so now we're doing something not because it's what we're passionate about or not because it's really what we want to do. We're doing it because we have to do it. And when you have to do something, the drive or motivation to excel at it is elevated. Now, I believe some people, that light bulb goes off and they realize, okay, wait a minute, the only way to get out of this, to take these bricks off, is to get really good at this because I hate it. And if I get really good at it, then I can be more successful and then it'll be my out, right? With less risk. I don't have to knock it down or lose my job or go start all over again. I can get really, really good at this and take some of the wall down, and then it creates opportunity. So I think what happens is by default, people find themselves in a situation doing something they don't want, including, with all due respect, parenting. I think a lot of times people get themselves in situations that they really didn't want the children, but they chose to anyways. And now they're struggling at trying to be a committed, dedicated, awesome parent all the time, which is hard, even if you have the means. I think it's with the jobs we take. I think in the neighborhoods we live. I think we make a lot of decisions, small decisions, that get us in a position where, like, oh my God, and it's overwhelming. So they go into what I'll call coast mode or maintain mode. I just don't want to go any deeper, but I'm not committing to getting out, and I want to just get away from this. So I don't know. What do you think?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, and then I need to reflect on it a little more. But I do know that you're one of the founders of cognitive therapy, this approach to psychotherapy that really asks people to examine their thoughts, and the assumption is that, like, if the thoughts are what give rise to your feelings, your emotions, and you don't like the emotions and the feelings that you have, you should go upstream from them. Like, what are those thoughts that are really driving it, right? So one of the founders was Aaron Beck, who's right here in Philadelphia, and the other was Albert Ellis. So around the same time, these two psychologists were kind of coming to this insight. And Albert Ellis always said that, like, ought or should are not good words. You know, they're not healthy words, right? And it is interesting. There's a reason why we feel like we should, eat a salad for lunch, or we, like, ought to call our mothers back or something. And I don't want to say that that feeling of obligation is always a bad thing, because that is partly what morality is. I mean, feeling an obligation to do the right thing, even if it doesn't feel good. But there is another way of thinking about it, which I think, by the way, I don't want to put words, I think Will Smith would approve of this, just, like, thinking about the way he
there is
like, so he says, it must be right. But no, I mean, there is this philosopher named Harry Frankfurt at Princeton who wrote this essay on what it means to be free. What does it mean for a human being to truly have free will? And he said that, lots of creatures have wants, like animals have wants, they want food, they want safety, they want water, but only human beings, are free in the sense that we have want to wants. He calls them, like, secondary desires. Like, I want this ice cream cone, but maybe I don't want to want the ice cream cone. In fact, I sort of wish I didn't want the ice cream cone, right? And that's kind of another way of thinking about oughts and shoulds. Maybe instead of thinking, like, oh, I should call my mother, like, oh, I should have a salad. Maybe actually we think about it as, like, I want to call my mother. Anyway, it's very deep, and it's, like, blowing my mind. I won't go.
Ready for this? Focus. I heard a phrase on this the other day. Focus on the opportunity, not the obligation. Right.
It's like, do you want this? Like, if you want to be in shape, then it's a pivot. But I do think there's something very powerful there. And I will say that, for lack of a better word, one observation of these people that I study who are very gritty and successful is like, wow, they are by and large the most positive people. I mean, they're just like crazy positive people. They're always looking for like what they could have learned in that situation. And so it wasn't all bad because, they came out with these 2 lessons. I mean, that is, call it whatever you want, but it is a very, one of the kids I wrote about in the book, that, so you might remember this kid, Cody Coleman. He grew up in this like terrible, just like right out of the, New York Times op-ed section about just like poverty and kids' dysfunctional life. And this kid ends up going to MIT, but not only does he go to MIT, he graduates with a 4.9 out of 5. Not only does he graduate with a 4.9 out of 5, electrical engineering and computer science, right? Not like a slacker major. And this kid, when I talked to him, and I was like, "What? Who are you? Like, this doesn't happen, And he said, like, I'm the happiest, most positive person you'll meet. I mean, and that was the first thing out of his mouth, right? He actually didn't say grit. He said, like, I am the happy. I mean, he contacted me because he felt like he was very gritty, and that was sort of the fuel. But if you kind of ask, like, I think that's really interesting, and I think this way of pivoting things, right? So when you 2 people walk out of the same situation, one of them only sees doom and gloom. The other one sees like, what did they learn, and what are they going to do next?
You have, this is your next research project. I mean, and I talk about it in my book. You have one of the best minds on the idea of happiness, and it was your mentor, Seligman, right? So you 2 come together and work on that bad boy. Maybe there's something there.
Yeah, I think I should work with Marty more. Yeah, he was my PhD advisor. His office is right over there. And his thinking is, as you know, constantly evolving. And one thing he would say, if you were joining us, is that, happiness isn't one thing, it's many things. It's, there's pleasure, right? There's sort of like having a lot of positive emotion. There's being engaged, being in the flow state at the extreme. There is relationships, which is probably, if you look at data, the single most predictive factor in whether you're happy. Do you have healthy and warm relationships with other people? There's meaning, a sense of purpose, for me, and for the great research, like other-centered purpose, belonging to and serving other people. And then finally, there's achievement, which is what I spend a lot of my life studying. And Marty would say, like a flourishing life has to have at least some of all 5 of those things.
Yeah, I can see that. And as I heard you talk, I was processing, especially the piece about giving to others, having a greater purpose. And I can feel when my headspace is in how this can affect other people, I'm more energized. And my headspace is how am I making this work for me? Because I have bills to pay, or I want to be something. It's not as motivating. It's a very interesting. It just got me physically right there. All right, so everybody, we are talking to Angela Duckworth. She is the author of the best-selling book, Grit. She is full of energy. She has great stories. She has lots of fun. So I'm gonna turn the table a little here and start moving into some actionable stuff. So how do people, and primarily let's talk about salespeople or just adults in the workplace, how do people really turn the grit spigot on? Even a spigot you can turn on. How do people become more gritty?
One thing that I've learned from my research is that, we think about people as are they gritty? Are they not gritty? Are they extroverted? Are they not? And in our eye, other people end up being almost these like caricatures who don't change very much, right? But actually, if you look at what people do across different situations, different days, different times in their life, but even just situations in a given day, there's a lot of variability, right? So I think you mentioned it, like you could be gritty in one domain, but not in another. You could be nice to one person, rude to another, right? And so I think a lot of the potential that's sort of on the table would be trying to figure out when are you at your best, and why, and then why not be that way those other times. So it's kind of, if you have a distribution for like you at your best, you at your worst, and then there's like a lot of time where you're somewhere in between, why couldn't you shift this distribution? Why couldn't you live at the upper end of your distribution? And I think it starts with, like everything else, some self-awareness, right? Like, who are you nice to? Or like, that's about niceness, but like, when are you most passionate and persevering? You had a little bit of insight just there. You're like, when it's situations where like other people are benefiting, that turns on the motivation or the drive. And sometimes it can be other things, like a lot of it is interest. I'm really interested in psychology, and aside from the current ridiculousness of the political landscape, I mean, country's like gone nuts. I mean, I'm generally interested in politics. I sort of recently, I'm feeling like we all have a responsibility to be interested in politics because America's just going
Amen.
crazy.
Amen.
Right? And we all need to vote, and we all need to read the newspaper. But in general, right, my preference is like to not be told about, anything about politics. So I think, then that's a good thing to observe in me. Like it took me until I was 32 to figure out I even wanted to be a psychologist, right? And believe me, I would have done it earlier if I could have, but I didn't really have the self-understanding to realize that when I'm thinking about psychology, when I'm thinking about people and why they do what they do, I am endlessly fascinated. I don't know why I didn't think of it earlier, because I was 32 when I figured it out, but I was 16, which is half that lifetime ago, right? 16 years old when I had this course catalog for summer school, and I could pick anything. And I picked psychology and writing. And then that's kind of what I grew up to be. So I don't know what took so long, but that like observations, like, if I have a day where I do get my run in, where I do make that difficult phone call, where I do get all my work done, where I feel like great at the end of the day, that awareness, that reflection, be like, well, why do I think that was? And what is it about a bad day that makes it a bad day? It's not even necessarily like trying to change something fundamental about you. It's really about living at the upper end of your distribution.
So you hit this several times. And yeah, I won't punch you. The idea of self-awareness. I'd like to spend a few minutes on this because I think people run from themselves more often than not. One of my favorite books of all time is Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. Have you read that book?
I have it. It was a great title.
Oh, you love it because it's one of those books that they probably could have done in half the book, but still, that's okay. The whole premise is the idea of cognitive dissonance and self-justification around the idea of personal awareness, this perception of self. So, I perceive myself to be a certain way. And if any of my actions, conscious or subconscious, could reflect that is inconsistent with my sense of self, I don't want to hear it. Right? So this idea of, I am fascinated with this idea of self-awareness and how it affects people positively and negatively. But I think the lack of is the big one. Go a little deeper on this idea of our lack of willingness to address.
Yeah, I was on the phone this morning with another professor, but he used to be a postdoc researcher in my lab, so we continue to collaborate. His name is Brian Gala. He's at Pitt. He's at UPitt, and he studies mindfulness, and he's actually really like a lifetime meditation. He's a practitioner, but we have this grant to study mindfulness for a couple of years, and we were talking about how this applies to the everyday struggles that you and I and everybody else has. And one of the things he said is like, the core of mindfulness is when you can say the sky is blue or it's about to rain with the same amount of non-judgmental awareness as, I got fired. Like you have to be able to be like, because it's all about truth, right? It's like, it is about to rain, which I think it is actually. I did X, Y, and Z wrong. Like, people don't like me because I dominate the conversation, or like I'm a little bit racist, or like things that are true. Like people don't want to. So it's very interesting. It's like I think that is not something that comes naturally for most of us. I mean, for lots of reasons, we have defenses against that. But I do think that is that is a level of awareness to really be able to know yourself, all the parts that are great, all the parts that aren't so great, some of the parts that you might want to change, with a kind of non-judgment. That's what mindfulness is defined as: non-judgmental awareness of reality, of the present. So anyway, I don't have good data on this, but I can tell you from interviewing exemplars of grit that the signature sort of like common denominator, I write in the book, they say, they have deep interest and they have a sense of purpose, they know how to practice, they have a resilience, they have hope. But I think actually in a way, what has gotten them to a lot of these things is a self-awareness, a reflection, they're very cognitively aware people. They're not like, not just like reacting. And I think that is actually, where growth comes from, right? We have a study where we're looking at how people rate themselves and how other people rate you, in particular kids, right?
Jahari's window.
What?
Sort of like Jahari's window?
What's that?
Oh, how people see you, how you see you, the four quadrants. Oh, so it's okay. How you see me and how I see me, so we both see the same thing, right? Then how I see me that you don't see me, so I'm hiding something from you, right? Maybe something I don't want to show to the world. Then there's what I don't see in me and you don't see in me, so either it doesn't exist or it's unknown to both of us. Then there's what I don't see in me but you see in me, and that's called the blind spot.
Oh, interesting.
And a lot of people get tripped up by their blind spot because they, like to your point, they think they're super engaging, but the world thinks they're a jerk because they're constantly interrupting them. But they don't see that.
Yeah. And I guess it could go the other way, right? It could go that you don't realize that you're like a great funny guy and everyone thinks that, but you don't even realize that, right? So that's great. I didn't learn that. I love learning things I don't know. We have this data on kids who rate themselves and their behavior, right, in the classroom, and then all of their teachers rate them, right? So in that case, the teachers have a real advantage, especially when you have all the teachers' perspective in the kid. So you could ask the question, how accurate are kids? Well, there is a fair amount of, there are a lot of kids who just get it spot on, using the same questions, the number that comes out is exactly what the teacher, there are a lot of kids like that. There are a lot of kids who overrate themselves, right? They think they think they're paying attention, and then their teachers are like, no, I don't really see that. And then there's a handful of kids, not many, who underrate themselves. But what we find is that the kids, in the short term at least, the kids who overrate themselves, they have an inflated sense of their self-control, they're actually happier. They're yeah, life is pretty great, but they don't do well, especially if you follow their performance over time. Objectively speaking, their grades and their standardized test scoring they're not great, and they're worse than other kids. So I think in a way, delusional, not seeing your blind spot, that lack of awareness. I mean, if you ask the question why aren't we all self-aware? Why don't we all become self-aware?
It hurts.
Because I think that's right, because it causes you some unhappiness. I mean,
wow.
I gave a talk in Chicago on the book, and one of the school principals, wrote me back and was like, thank you, here are some things that were really great, I want to give you some feedback because you're all about practice and feedback. He's like sometimes when you say things in certain ways, it could be a little bit condescending, right? And I was like, what? I'm not condescending. I'm so not condescending. The last thing I am is, and then I had to think I was like, he has to be right. If somebody in the audience says that I think you're a little, they're right. I mean, how can he not be right? He's the one who's hearing it. If he hears it as condescending, that's what I was saying. And I wrote him back and I thanked him and I asked him to coach me a little bit. And he gave me some pointers about ways of saying things that are not condescending. When I read them, I was like, you know what? That is way better. So that was painful for me. I didn't like it. And I had to force myself to do it. Maybe I'll be evolved enough someday so that I'm so mindful that I can just be like, oh, I'm being told that I was wrong. And I will just, but I'm not there yet. That's for sure.
God, I really like how you handled that. I really do. Because one of the challenges I have a really big personality, as you can imagine, and I get feedback all the time. And I work really hard. When I get the feedback, the first thing I try to do is stop that feeling. It starts coming up. You want to do this. No. Push it down. And you listen. Where the conflict comes from me, and I don't know if you've gotten here, if you've witnessed it, is for that doing some of the things that man may have suggested, right, could trigger the other side of the spectrum where someone says, you used to be really engaging and challenging. Yeah. And now you're not. Right. So I honestly believe there's this place where you can't be all things to all people. So where if your style is considered like mine, challenging and engaging, I have raving fans for that. Some people hate it for a particular reason. If I take that in, I have to be careful not to take so much in that now this person likes me or appreciates it. I'm not. But now these people don't think I'm very challenging or engaging.
Right, right. And you don't want to be a weather vane, right? You don't want to be like, oh, now I have to do this, now I have to do that. I mean, what you're listening for is what you would have to agree with. I mean, when I read that, I was like, I have to, I mean, I was thinking about it. It's like, I think he's right. Someone else told me, he's like, why do you have all these like guys in your slides? And I was like, what do you mean all these guys? And they're like, Will Smith, like Pete Carroll, like, and then I pointed out the women in the slides. I was like, yeah, but I also have like Martha Graham, and I have Catherine Cox. But then I did count, and I was like, okay, they're right. There were more guys in the slides than there are women. So I think that's just like a fact. I mean, I think you don't want to take like when I read the reviews of my book. I mean, like there are some nasty, nasty people. Like,
yeah, I saw that. Sorry, girl. Sorry, I saw that, and I felt for you.
I think I figured out that I have a thin skin, but like you don't want to respond to like if you try to like please every Amazon reviewer, right? You will write a shit book, right? Because title's too long, title's too short, I don't like the cover, too thin, too many stories, not enough stories, too much data, not enough data. Like, you won't even know who you are anymore. But I do think, I've seen these people like, so because of the people I study, they're Olympic athletes or they're famous, right, for something. The one thing I always want to myself be, and I think the best ones that I study is that, they really are never done learning. And so they want people to be honest with them, and they want to be honest with themselves, and that is hard with success, because basically the more successful you get, the more people are just going to tell you you're great.
Yes. I feel you. I completely feel you there. All right, so we've opened this up to anybody who wants to jump in. So folks, anybody who wants to jump in, meet Angela, ask a question, jump in. And while we wait for that, so one of the things about, I want to move this right to sales. This has been so good, and I own not driving it directly into the sales world, but I like where we were going. I think the really smart people can get something out of this and apply it to themselves. But in sales, there's a lot of pressure for salespeople to be successful. Their numbers, unlike any other job, are right in front of them. The whole world sees he's making it. He's not. There's no hiding in sales. And I think for some people who have this natural inclination to grit, if there's such a thing, or they've learned it early, they do really well. There's a large chunk of people who have a hard time getting to that next level. In something like sales and meeting quota and doing those types of things, what do you say to salespeople about that and how they can leverage grit in your lessons?
So, I think that the answer might be different for different people depending on the why, right? If like I had a former student, he dropped by today. I won't embarrass him by naming him because he'll kill me. He like shows up in my office and I'm like, what the hell are you doing here? And he's like, I'm just here, whatever. He already graduated. And I sat him down in my office. I was like, get a job yet? He's like, nah, I didn't get a job yet. And I was like, all right, I need your CV. I need your cover letter. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. Okay, deadline, 24 hours. But I asked him like if I interview, like, why should I hire you, right? Like, why? What's the real answer to that? And he was like, because I'm proficient. And I was like,
oh, that's an awful answer.
What does that mean? He's like, because like if this is like okay and this is really great, like I'm solidly here. And I was like, what? I was like, like you're gonna die, I'm gonna die. However long it is, it's not that long. Like you could kill it. Like don't be like I'm gonna be proficient, right? Like. And he's like, well, maybe I should say it a different way. And I'm like, well, for sure you should say it a different way, but you should look a different way, right? Like, you're like 22, like proficient. So anyway, if he's listening, he'll be really glad I didn't say his name. But anyway, so I think the question is why. Which is why I asked him. I mean, before I end up like making prescriptions. I mean, I think it always starts with why am I not interested in this? Am I, do I feel like it lacks meaning for me? Is there something else that I really want to do? Are there some things that I just have to suck it up and be mature about, like getting feedback? Do I think that like whatever it is, like I think you have to start with the why because there's different answers to the why, and then you have to start from there.
So you brought in, we're going to introduce Jeffrey in 1 second, but in these last 10 minutes, you brought in Simon Sinek, David Dunning. By the way, you know David, don't you know David?
I don't know. Wait, who is he? I can't remember.
The Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect.
I don't know him personally, but like I know.
Okay, I do. You two need to know each other because you're doing some of the work that he's already got a foundation on.
Oh, he's like a giant. He's like amazing.
Yeah, so if you'd like an introduction, I can do that. Great guy. He's over at University of Michigan now. But his whole idea of self-assessment, like how did I do versus my level of skill, yeah.
Right.
So
get
if you would like that, I can do it.
Wrong, exactly. Yeah. Okay. He's like I'm such a big fan.
All right, I will connect you to that. So Jeff, welcome, my man. Welcome,
Hey.
welcome. So it's all floor is all yours, baby.
My question for Dr. Duckworth, there's more to grit than persistence, clearly, but do you find people being persistent to a fault or maybe to their own detriment as a result of trying to be grittier?
I haven't found many examples of that just in my research, but let me first say it's certainly possible, right, to hang on too long to something, right? I mean, to stay in a job to stay in a relationship, right, long past its expiration date. The reason why that would be is because the real cost of that isn't, I'm tired. The real cost is opportunity cost, as the economist would say, like what you could have done, like the opportunity that you gave up because you were with this person, working in this company. And I think it's certainly possible. I think that the advice I would have to kind of like, how would you not do that, right? I mean, on the one hand, I'm saying like work really hard, even when the odds are against you, and how do you not get into that hole? I think that, when two things, like one is, I always like when I meet somebody that I really admire, I always ask them like, what's your telos? Like, what are you about? Like, like, what are you for? Like, what is the one thing that, you could argue is like the theme of your life? And sometimes people have it, but oftentimes they're like, I don't know, but it's always a good homework assignment. And I think that the people who really have a life where it is integrated, there's like harmony, they know what they're about, and therefore all those sub goals and the to-do lists and it's aligned, it's congruent, and it makes sense. And if you keep your eye on your telos, which is usually very abstract, I mean, for me, it's using psychological science to help kids thrive. I mean, every day, everything I do, including this podcast, is like, is this in some way going to help me achieve the goal of helping kids through psychological science? That's something where I can be very tenacious and stubborn about. But I think that like it gives me flexibility on the bottom end. Do I have to be working on this project? Like maybe not. Like maybe this collaborator, maybe they're a pain in the ass and they never answer their emails. Like maybe I can give up on this collaborator, but I'm staying loyal to the telos. That's one thing. The second thing is, having a small group of trusted advisors that are not like random people blogging about you that are not thoughtful, but like, the people that you really admire and respect, like one or two of them, so that they can be your sanity check and be like, hey, am I being a total idiot here?
Well, and that comes back to self-awareness, right? Like what you were just talking about a few minutes ago, and understanding. I don't know, there aren't very many people who actually have that, let alone the self-awareness or knowing what that telos is. And I think what's interesting is, I think many of the people who are watching or listening have read or are at least familiar with these books or these concepts that we're talking about and how they all relate back to that. And grit is an extension of knowing what it is that you're supposed to be doing and knowing that it's more about being persistent, but knowing what you're being persistent in and how that relates to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bomb drop.
I mean, do it, right? Like when I was writing that part of the book where I talk about, your purpose, and then also, these goals that are like nested in a little Christmas tree with your top level goal on top. And I actually couldn't articulate before I wrote that chapter what mine was. I mean, it was a little smushy, you know what I mean? Definitely about kids. And then I actually made myself do it. Like I gave myself that homework and I was like, oh, you know what? Really, that is what it is. And it made everything clear. And I was with this media consultant, this guy who was great. He coached me to, be on these like talk shows and not screw it up. And we were talking, he's giving me feedback, stop biting your lip, don't drink water. Like he wouldn't be happy that I was drinking this because that was one of the things that like.
Hey, I'm thrilled. It's all about authenticity. I got my Red Bull. You got your water. Bring it, people.
Look good. He's like, look, that doesn't look good. But then I asked him, because he really understood the book, but I said to him, it's like, so by the way, what's your telos? And he's like, and then, he wrote me back 24 hours later by email and he said, I figured out my telos. My telos is helping people share their story. And when he understood that, he could understand every major decision that he had made that was a good decision. And he understood like when he was most motivated. And I think that is a really helpful thing. I think self-awareness may not be the default, but it's definitely something that you can get better at.
It was great to meet you. I'll hop off so someone else can hop on, but thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Way to go, Bajorek. Way to go, brother. Well done. Thank you, my man. All right. So I know we got like 3 minutes and I know, look, he's old school. I am a huge believer that where the puck is going is authenticity and who people really are. No longer the whole buttoned up thing and put on an image and then be something somewhere else. So I'm glad you are exactly who you are today, sister. And I'm going to call you Angela. Dr. D, I kind of like, though. I might sneak in and call you Dr. D, but I don't know about Dr. Duckworth. That's a mouthful and doesn't fit. I mean, you're good people.
That's my white husband's name.
I'm sorry?
That's my white husband's name. It's a very white name, and I married this very white guy, and that's just, I wasn't even like thinking about it. I just changed my name. It wasn't even like a statement, and now I have this. So it used to be.
So what was your maiden name?
Lee, L-E-E, which has like, I think it translates into like something beautiful in Chinese, like long extended wisdom or something. And now I'm like Duckworth.
You know, it is what it is, I suppose. We can go with Lee Duckworth if we want. We can go Lee Duckworth, right? All right, so look, we got a few minutes. I'm going to let you wrap this up. What do you want to end on? What do you want to tell people?
I think I want to say that, really, if there's anything that I've learned is that, people really are what my, colleague and my friend Carol Dweck would say. We are born to learn and grow. It's a great freedom to know you don't have to be perfect. You'll never be perfect. You make bad decisions. Lose your temper. But we are all pretty much growing most of us, I'd say, in a good direction. We're we learn stuff, we get better, and data bear that out, by the way. It's not just sort of wishful thinking. And so the people that I've studied who are paragons of passion and perseverance are by no means perfect. Some of them struggle with depression, struggle with eating disorders. Some of them are still on medication, bad marriages, good decisions, bad decisions. But so I think that my recommendation is not to try to be perfect, but really to say every day, can I just, let me be my best today. Let me do something a little better than I did yesterday. Let me give it a shot.
I like that. I think it's a great way to end it. I think if I could be so humble enough to add to it, I like to say, as you said, everybody learns every day. And I say this a lot in my speaking engagements, but that's the default setting. If we're deliberate in our learning, that's learning on steroids.
Yeah.
Right. It's and in order to be deliberate in learning, I have to be self-aware in order to know what I should be learning today, rather than being lucky. Oh, I'm bad at this. And look what I learned. That's a good map. That could take a long time. So I'd be better off to learn that earlier, and I can accelerate my growth.
Yeah. Jump the gear. Be in the driver's seat.
All right. Good. So with that final note, just because I can, it's what I'm good at. Did you ever get to reading my book? Because I know I signed one for you.
I have it on my bedstand. I started it. And
okay, good.
Again, so you know how I am. So yeah.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
I said, well, A, I started it, and B, I finish whatever I begin. So that bodes well.
All right. So of course, I will be very, very interested in your thoughts of it, and all honest thoughts, which I know I'll get from you as well, because it's written. So it's nothing I can do about it now. It is what it is. All right. So listen. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this. I loved your enthusiasm. I loved your passion. I would love to do something like this again with you in a different setting or this setting in the future. You made the mistake of giving me your cell phone number, so do not be surprised if I'm in Pennsylvania and I call you. Because I've only said this to one other guest, maybe. You're cool as, I could hang and talk to you for hours. So this is not the end. And if I have a fault, I'm kind of, not conceited, but I'm kind of snobbish. I don't connect with very many people. So I like people.
Selective.
Yes, very selective. I mean, I appreciate everybody, but really liking people. So I like you. So you're going to get a call. It's in the end, just so you know.
Snaps.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Go make your call. Everybody else, this was The Word. Thank you, Kiki. Do what you got to do. I know she's in a rush. If you want to jump off, Angela, you can. I'm going to wrap up with Kiki. Do we have any? Thank you, Angela. Do we have anything we need to close on the show? What's next? Who's our next guest? Do you remember?